Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this magnificent event. My name is Jocelyn Burnell, and I'm the current president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So a particular welcome to our premises if you've not been here before. Royal Society of Edinburgh contains a lot of eminent scientists with Scottish connections, but we're not exclusively a scientific body. We also have people from arts, humanities, social services, business, practitioner artists, a huge range, which makes it a very interesting and fertile ground for all sorts of discussions. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then I will introduce David Forfar, who will give us a bit of background. So this event is sponsored by the James Clerk Maxwell Foundation, the Institute of Physics in Scotland, the IEEE and the University of Edinburgh, and we're grateful to all of those. And we're also very grateful to the speakers, a number of whom have come quite some distance to be here. On the slide is the evacuation procedures. We're not expecting an alarm or a drill today, so if there is a fire alarm, take it seriously. Please go across the road, having exited either by that door or out the one nearest to me on your right-hand side. Go across the road to stand outside what's labelled as the printing press. For locals who haven't been in George Street recently, that's the new name of the George Hotel's restaurant. So go stand outside the George Hotel restaurant. We'll gather there. If you have a mobile phone, could you switch it to silent, please? And can I also advise you that this event is being live streamed and filmed and will be available on the PRSE website after the conference. There'll also be a report writer present who'll put up a written account approximately 2 weeks after the event. I hope you have all noticed amidst the wind and rain the James Clerk Maxwell statue out in George Street, just a little bit to the right of the door of the Society. In front of it last week, we unveiled a plaque giving Maxwell's equations, the Heaviside version. The unveiling took place on the 3rd of November with Alistair Allen, the Minister for Learning, Science and Scotland's Languages. And you're welcome to go look at this during one of the breaks. Just check out the weather. Our first speaker is currently being dried off, having got very, very wet on his way here. So choose your moment. There'll be an exhibition in the Welcome West room, and there's going to be, what's this? Oh yes, there'll be a photograph of the plaque if you find it too wet to get out there. So having dealt with the housekeeping arrangements, is anybody puzzled about any of those arrangements? We're okay. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the James Clerk Maxwell Foundation, David Forfar, to say a few words.
Well, thank you, President. And I would like to add my welcome to that of the President and say a few words as chairman of the James Clerk Maxwell Foundation. The Maxwell Foundation is very honoured indeed to welcome this panel of speakers and such a distinguished panel to address us today. And the Foundation would also like to thank the staff of the Royal Society of Edinburgh for organisation of this conference, and also to thank the audience for coming today. So the Foundation is very conscious that this year, 2011, marks both the 150th anniversary of Maxwell's equation and the 100th anniversary of Einstein's general relativity. And the importance, I think, is not too much to say for all of mankind. The importance for all of mankind of Maxwell's equations was well brought out by the Nobel Prize American physicist Richard Feynman, who said, from a long view of history of mankind, seen from, say, 10,000 years from now, there can be little doubt that the most significant event of the 19th century will be judged as Maxwell's discovery of the laws of electrodynamics. The American Civil War will pale into provincial insignificance in comparison with this important scientific event of the same decade. Praise indeed. Now, I think it's very appropriate that today's conference should be organised and in the Royal Society of Edinburgh because of the close connections between Maxwell and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And these are legion. For example, Maxwell, as a schoolboy of only 14, had presented his first paper on oval curves at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Indeed, by the time he went up to Cambridge as an undergraduate, he'd presented 2 further papers to the Royal Society of Edinburgh, one on rolling curves and one on the elasticity of elastic solids. And he'd published these in the Transactions of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So not surprising that Maxwell was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh at a very young age of 24. And what is not so well known is that Maxwell had 12 relatives who were either Fellows of the Royal Society of Edinburgh or the Royal Society of London. And I don't think this is so well known, but I think it's rather remarkable and possibly unique. Of course, Maxwell knew Lord Kelvin, who was formerly the Royal Society of Edinburgh President and the Royal Society President, and also Professor Peter Guthrie Tate, who was the former RSE Secretary, and who was the Professor of Physics at the time at Edinburgh. And also in 2008, we had the George Street statue of Maxwell commissioned by the Royal Society of Edinburgh when Sir Michael Atiyah was the president. Now, as Sir Michael was previously the Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and as a Trinity graduate myself, and I know that several people in the audience are Trinity graduates or have connection with Trinity, I think it's probably appropriate to tell a rather nice story about Maxwell's first introduction to Trinity. So in 1850, when Maxwell applied to Cambridge, he actually applied first to Peterhouse College, not in fact to Trinity, and indeed spent his first term at Peterhouse. But after a term, for whatever reason, he thought he would rather transfer to Trinity College. So he applied to transfer, but first had to be interviewed. And he was interviewed by a Trinity Don whose name was Professor William Thomson. But I would say not any relation to Lord Kelvin, whose name also happened to be William Thomson. But unfortunately, the interview was not going terribly well, and Maxwell probably realized this. And so suddenly, to redeem the situation, Maxwell reached into his pocket and took out the 3 mathematical papers, which Maxwell, had already published and presented to the Royal Society of Edinburgh and had been published in the Transactions. And Maxwell handed these 3 papers to Professor Thomson, saying, perhaps these may show you that I'm not unfit to be at your college. Well, Professor Thomson was rather surprised at this turn of events, but nevertheless leafed through the papers. But there was a slight problem. Maxwell didn't know that Professor Thomson was actually the professor of Greek. And while he was, of course, Professor Thomson was, of course, very familiar with alphas, betas, and gammas, used in the context of the Greek language, but he was not used to the context in which Maxwell had employed them. Nevertheless, Professor Thomson, to his great credit, immediately recognized that it was something very much out of the ordinary to have an undergraduate who was only 18 or 19, who had already published 3 papers in the Transactions of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So Professor Thomson was very impressed and immediately offered Maxwell a place at Trinity. And there's a nice sequel to this story in that Maxwell later became a Fellow of Trinity. Professor Thomson was later the Master of Trinity, as was Sir Michael. Thank you very much.